What is up, nerd friends? Welcome back to the Nerd Bench. We're going to jump inside the XR10 G3 or G3X because they share exactly the same firmware and go through and talk about what each of the settings do. Real quick, before we get started, first question is, what's the real difference between the G3 and the G3X? Obviously, the G3X is the gray in color. It has the larger size wires, and this guy does not have the reverse voltage protection built in. They both have, other than that, the exact same features beyond one minor caveat, and that during the data logging, the X does not support the current sensing, so you won't see any amps data or anything like that. But otherwise, both of them have the same motor limit, the same BEC, they're the same MOSFETs inside, same core power board, all that fun stuff. It's just one does not have the reverse voltage protection built in. The X has the larger wires on the X, and it is gray in color, does not have the current draw supported in the data logging. But otherwise, they are pretty much exactly the same. You could use one in modified, one in stock. A lot of folks say I've seen it online that the X has a motor limit. It doesn't. It's the same, they're both the same. They're for modified racing or spec racing. But people favor the bigger wire and the lack of safety for the spec racing, so we have that option available. Now that we got that out of the way, if you've never used the programming or tuning, you can use the LCD Program Box Pro, or you can use the OTA module. Both of these, the OTA module and the LCD Program Box Pro, have Bluetooth built into them, so they function with the Link app. It's called the HW Link V2 in your favorite app store. Before you get running a speed control, I tell everyone, make sure you turn everything on, check for updates, make sure that you uninstall, reinstall your app to make sure it's up to date, and most importantly, that your phone's operating system is up to date. We are forced into a lot of updates to the app because of the operating systems having updates, so you want to make sure that you kind of have all that covered. And the other pro tip is that if you are going to do any firmware updates, do everything in airplane mode so that you don't get a call. You want to make sure that your screen lock is off, that the phone can't get interrupted or disconnected during that update process or that firmware update, because you can run into some problems that way. If you ever do have a problem, like with a firmware update that fails, you get a call, something happens, you walk off with your phone and it disconnects in the middle of the update. I've seen folks have battery packs die because they weren't using a charged battery pack. There is some saving that you can use the LCD Program Box Pro in conjunction with the Windows computer and the Hobbywing USB link to kind of force an update. It's a little more stable, I guess, in some regards. And sometimes you can bring an ESC back from the brink with that combination. So now that we've got all those pro tips out of the way, let's jump right into some of the core features that you might want to be aware of, both with the LCD Program Box, the OTA, speed control, firmware app, all that stuff before we jump too far into the program. So first thing I'm going to do, I got a battery hooked up over here. Turn this guy on. It's plugged in through the programming port into the side that's the ESC port on the programmer, and it comes up with a parameter screen to get in there. So when everything's powered up, you're going to go up to the little link icon. This guy comes up. Mine's called LCD Program Box Pro. My password is the default password. I leave it the same all the time as all 8s. You jump inside. And to see the speed control settings, you go to parameters. To a speed control firmware update, you go to firmware update. But to do the other updates, either to the app or the database that's in the box or the database that's in the app, you're going to go through settings. And in here you can go to about, and this will show you your app version and your database version for the app. So that's all for the app itself. You can check for updates there by tapping on it. It will tell you if there's an update available. To get to the firmware and the database, either of your OTA or your LCD Program Box Pro, you go to settings of the Bluetooth module, and here's where you can change the name of your module, or you can change the password, check for firmware updates, and check for the database update. The database updates are important for standalone operation of the LCD Program Box Pro, and the firmware update is important for the Bluetooth features to keep that all with all the updated speed controls and things like that when new speed controls come out. Usually you're going to see either firmware for the Bluetooth modules or databases for the Bluetooth modules that happen. So now that we've covered where all that is located, which databases, which firmwares, and all that, we can go back out here to parameters and start talking about the speed control itself. So starting at the left, you have reset. That resets the profile. So if you make a bunch of changes, you don't like them, you can hit reset and it clears all that out. Import brings the speed control settings in from the speed control, saves them to the phone. Export brings them out of the phone into the speed control. It only works if you have the same firmware and same model of speed control. So you can't be mixing and matching stuff. They have to be identical. And the save button is everybody's best friend because that actually saves the settings in there. So the first one, you can rename your profiles. There's 3 profiles that you can save and rename and do whatever you need to. They just have names on them that are kind of generic. You can change those to whatever you need them to be so that you can remember them. You just tap rename after you select it, and then you can make the profile whatever you want it. And then you hit save to actually make that setting save in there. Most important thing, gotta hit save, otherwise nothing saves. And then another thing you want to keep in mind, if you're going in here to get yourself into blinky mode, blinky is 0 timing whatsoever. So you have to turn the turbo to 0, you have to turn the boost to 0, and you also have to set both of the softening settings to 0 as well. That rule got changed several years ago. A lot of people don't know about it, so I like to mention it before we get too far into this. If you're looking to go to blinky class racing and get that rapid blink with a pause and the rapid blinks, that's what's the standard now. You have to turn off the turbo, the boost, as well as the softening. So my little screen record guy doesn't let me scroll up and down, so it wasn't making it so I could move this screen and show you guys. So I have to bear with me as we go to old school here. But first, after we change out of basic to advanced mode, you get your running mode selection. And this guy allows you to pick from forward with brake, forward with reverse, or forward and reverse if you're looking for that rock crawl style of driving. Some racing doesn't allow reverse. That's why it defaults with it forward to brake. So if you need reverse, that's where you go to change it. Max reverse force is how strong the reverse or how fast the reverse is, so you don't get full speed reverse basically. Your voltage cutoff, or your cutoff voltage as it says here, is the LiPo setting. And auto is going to be very safe and shut off early. And it probably won't be 3.5, it'll be much higher than that. So if you want to go like racing, this is your total pack voltage, not your per cell voltage. So what I usually tell folks is if you want to have good, still have a little bit of safety, I go down to 6 and I leave it kind of set at 6 volts so that if I don't feel the battery getting soft, at least it saves some of it, so to speak. So that's set to 6 volts there. You can set it higher to be safer, but voltage cutoff is adjustable because it varies from pack to pack, connections, temperatures, all that. So it allows you to kind of tune on your LiPo cutoff and get the most runtime out of it. ESC and motor thermal protection are exactly that. The motor thermal protection only works with Hobbywing motors because they're the only ones that have a thermal temperature sensor inside of the motor that feeds to the speed control. Other guys don't do that. And these are ones that I always leave alone. I like to have the little bit of safety there. Some folks disable them. A lot of racers I see, you know, who are looking at profiles, they disable that stuff because they'd rather overheat than lose a race. It makes sense. BEC voltage is next. That's the power to the receiver and the servos. It is, of course, adjustable in 1/10 of a volt from, I think it goes all the way down to 5 and all the way up to 7.4. I leave it set at 6. You can run HV servos on lower servo or lower voltage. It doesn't hurt them and it just slows them down, makes them live a little bit longer. Smart fan is the temperature controlled fan. If you want your fan to run all the time when you turn on the speed control, you disable this. If you only want it to run when it gets hot, you leave it enabled, pretty easy. Remote or auto off is when you hold the brakes. So you pull into the pits and you hold the brakes for 5 or 6 seconds and it turns the speed control off. This is helpful if you can't reach your on-off button very easily. I see a lot of guys use this in like sprint car racing where the cage kind of blocks the speed control access. Sensor mode is, there's full censored mode if you're using nice, fresh, I guess you'd say Hobbywing motors that have good sensor information. You can run in full sensor mode. If you're running maybe questionable motors that have less than clean sensor, or if you want to run sensorless, that's what that hybrid mode is for. It's kind of the best of both worlds. Typically for racers, they're all going to leave it in full censored all the time. But if you do notice any hiccups running brand XYZ motors, it's worth trying that hybrid motor as well. Motor rotation changes the forward direction of the motor from counterclockwise to clockwise. So if you have a backwards transmission vehicle, this is where you're going to go to change that. In a sensorless setup, you can switch 2 wires. Censored, you obviously can't because it'll cause problems. So this allows you to change that. Speaking of switching wires, phase A C swap. It allows you to switch the designation. There's 3 wires of the A and the C, and that's for clean wire installations. If you ever want your wires to not twist over each other on your install, you would use that. If none of that makes sense to you right away, don't worry. Just leave that disabled all the time and connect your motor wires correctly, and you'll be fine. Next, we get to our throttle control. Now, this is all the fun stuff. Throttle rate control, this is where a lot of people spend their time doing tuning in all this throttle section here. So we're going to spend a little more time on these. Throttle rate control is the speed that the speed control responds to your inputs. So normally it would be 1-to-1. As much throttle as you give it, the speed control is going to do that output. And as you lower the throttle rate control setting, that slows that down. So if it's real hard to pick up the throttle, feels like you can't grab the throttle slow enough, throttle rate control helps dial that in. You can turn that up or down. A lot of times you're going to use it a lot more in maybe modified racing because there's a lot more power there in spec racing. A lot of times we leave that cranked all the way up because we don't really have too much power for the traction. But if you do run into situations where you're getting wheel spin, throttle rate control can help with that a lot. Throttle curvature is a curve like an expo in your radio, but it does it right from the speed control. And it's just a simple way to add something from the speed control if you don't want to mess with the radio that either softens or makes the throttle feel more aggressive. It's a positive or a negative throttle curve. So and if you add to that number, make it higher, like go to the positive side, it's going to be more aggressive through the throttle range. If you make it negative, it's going to feel softer. Again, this is another situation of fine-tuning kind of for traction or grip levels, so to speak. Neutral range is your dead band, the space between the throttle and the brake area, and this helps control consistency of your drag brakes. If you feel like you're getting into drag brakes and they're not there all the time, or maybe your reverse isn't super consistent, your throttle pot's old and worn out, you haven't done a radio calibration to your radio itself, neutral range, increasing that can help you kind of ignore all the problems that are coming out of the trigger itself. So. Initial throttle force is the startup of the motor. If you've ever had it where you give it a little bit of throttle and the motor doesn't want to move right away, initial throttle force allows you to kind of tune that out. You raise that to get a little more higher starting RPM, if that makes any sense. Coast is a run-on feature, so that when you let off the throttle, it doesn't allow any natural deceleration of the motor. I don't want to say it applies power, but it feels that way. Makes it more like a nitro feel, how a nitro car doesn't have a lot of drag brake. Coast is that type of tuning feature. PWM drive frequency, also a very important one. This one is one that people tune a lot with because it controls the overall feel and I guess you'd say the traction of the motor, or the traction of the car. So the higher you set that frequency, the smoother the throttle response is going to be. Maybe it would feel like it has more traction. The lower you set that, the more punch it's going to have. So when bite's really high, you got a lot of grip, you can lower the drive frequency for more punch, more response type of feel. Softening value and softening range work together. This is actually reverse timing. It takes power away from the motor. So if you're ever having a real hard time picking up the throttle, no matter what you do, you got your throttle rate turned, you got your frequency turned way up, and it always feels a little aggressive on the bottom end, softening value and softening range allow you to take some power out through the first part of the trigger. So the value is how much you're taking out, and the range is how far in from neutral you're taking it away. So you can really kind of fine-tune the reduction of power and where it comes in and out. So if you want it just very initially, you can turn that way down so that as soon as you kind of just crack into the throttle, then that goes away. Or if you feel like you're having a real hard time driving it, you can crank the softening range way up and slowly back it down as you get more comfortable. Now, freewheeling is a great one. Freewheeling is a new feature that a lot of the speed controls in the Hobbywing lineup are having to help throttle match the RPM. So your throttle position and your RPM start to match. So you're in the throttle. As you let go of the throttle, it keeps the motor at the same RPM as your trigger. A lot of times that wasn't the case. As you decelerated, the motor would continue on its own deceleration curve independent of what the speed control was saying, and you wouldn't have any decel till you got to neutral and the drag brake kicked in. Freewheeling has made that a little bit different. That now, as you decelerate, the speed control tries to match that RPM very directly. And the higher you have the RPM decrease rate is the tuning of the freewheeling. So the higher you have that number, the harder the speed control is going to try to match those RPMs, and you're going to get more of that kind of deceleration feel as you roll out of the throttle. For the most part, all the folks that have been running the newer speed controls with the freewheeling them, leave it enabled and they love it, and they run it between 1 to 3 for most people, some a little higher. I've tried cranking it up and down. For the testing that I was doing, I didn't notice a huge difference. We didn't have a ton of traction, but that's neither here nor there, / testing. And then we get into the brake control, another area where people spend a lot of time fine-tuning things. So freewheeling, it works in conjunction or kind of sometimes against drag brake, because when you're sitting in the pits, revving it up and down because the freewheeling is doing one thing, and then you get right to neutral, the drag brake kicks in. I used to always say, if you're going to use freewheeling, don't use drag brake. after talking with Spencer and watching some of Mr. Rivkin's videos and his live stream, he kind of talked a little bit more about fine-tuning with that. And once you drive freewheeling a little bit more, you start to tune your drag brake in for that. So it's something to keep in mind as you're doing that. But initially, I still think maybe start out with no drag brake or very, very little drag brake for the most part. But drag brake is the percentage here is how much brake you get at neutral. So when you get your throttle back down to neutral, it applies brakes automatically. It's not drag racing brake. Don't get that mixed up. And then your drag brake rate is how quickly the speed control applies that drag brake. So if you think of the drag brake like yourself stepping on the brake pedal, drag brake rate is how fast you push on that brake pedal. So, and then you also have, you also have drag brake frequency independent of brake frequency. So you can really fine tune your drag brake frequency, which I think is pretty cool. Because sometimes you need your drag brake characteristics to be a lot different than your regular push brake characteristics. After that, we have max brake force, and that's referring to your push brakes. When you apply push brake, you can turn that down in the speed control so you don't have too much brake and give yourself kind of a self-limiter, I guess you'd say is the easy way to look at it. Brake rate control is a lot like the throttle rate control. It's the speed of the brake response in correlation to your inputs. So if the brakes feel super grabby, you can start to slow that down. For the most part, a lot of us leave those cranked up most of the time because we're kind of fine-tuning the brakes. But if you do get in a situation where brakes feel real tricky, you can start to lower that. If it's turned all the way up, it's going to be linear, 1-to-1, whatever you put in, it tries to do. If you start to lower that, it slows down its response the farther you go down. Brake control, you have three different types: linear, traditional, and disc brake. Linear is the default, what most of us are going to use. Traditional is going to be a little, I think the way we talked about this, and I apologize for not knowing for sure, is going to be a little softer overall than linear is. And then disc brake is going to be the more FOC style, I guess you'd say trigger or throttle position or brake position rather, and RPM matching. Linear is going to be what most of us are going to use most of the time. If you run into a situation where you can't get that turned down, you go to traditional, and then if you need tons of brakes, you go to disc brake. When you're into the disc brake mode, you get a couple more features. ABS force comes on and you lose brake frequency because that's not a thing. And then when you're in normal linear or traditional, you get back the brake frequency because those are also adjustable. So I'm going to leave this in linear. So real quickly though, on the disc brake with the ABS force, because the disc brakes are so strong, it has an ABS feature to help you fine tune that feel. It's another one of those where I don't have a lot of good starting points because I crank them all the way up and then I slowly work my way down. And I was expecting ABS to be super mega ridiculous, break my car brakes. They were definitely responsive, but it's still, there's only so much you can do with brakes, I guess. So, but the ABS force is the tuning of the disc brake only. So if you're in linear or traditional, you have, of course, brake curvature. That's like the throttle curvature where you get that expo type of curve that you can apply positive or negative. And then brake frequency is a lot like the drive frequency. Lower is going to be more aggressive, more, I guess you'd say, responsive. And higher is going to be smoother and a little bit softer feeling. Then we get down here to the fun stuff, timing. Electronic timing advance, boost, turbo, or timing are all kind of similar situations that work a little bit differently. Boost timing has an RPM range that you can control, or it has some auto modes as well that are pretty awesome that you can work with. And it applies electronic timing advance to the motor to make it faster. Turbo timing does the same thing, but it only does it after you get to full throttle. So we'll stick with boost. So you have your amount of boost, how much timing it's going to apply. Then you can set how it activates it, whether you're going to go by RPM. All right, here, I'm going to turn it a little bit on so we can see it here. So you have RPM, you have auto, or you have throttle position. I think these are all pretty cool ways to do boost tuning. Now, do you have to use boost? No, probably not. Most of these modified motor setups are fast enough that you don't need them. And spec motor racing, you don't use any boost because it's all blinky class racing. But as I've been working with more and more drivers, I do see people like to use it because it's there. The most simple way is to use the auto mode because the speed control has a way to look at RPM increases and it just decides when you need the boost. RPM is cool because you can control the exact RPM that it applies the boost. So if you look at your data logs, you can see what your RPMs are and actually apply that kind of correctly. And then the other one that's real neat is throttle position, because RPM is pretty easy. You set the RPM window. But throttle position, you get your boost start and your boost end, so you can tell what trigger position, where you want it to apply the boost through. So it starts at 10 and it ends at 50. Pretty cool. So I'm going to leave this on auto, and I'm actually going to turn it off because I'm not going to use any boost on this setup. And turbo timing is still electronic timing advance. It just does it after full throttle. So you have your amount of timing that you apply, same like boost, and then you have your turbo delay, your increase rate, and your decrease rate. Delay is how long after full throttle before it starts to apply the turbo. Then your increase rate is how quickly it applies the turbo. So in this example, it's 24 degrees, 1/10 of a second after I get to full throttle. It'll put 20 degrees in the first 1/10 of a second, and then the next 4 degrees the next 1/10 of a second. So it allows you to spread out your timing or your turbo application. And you can see you can make it come on all right away. You can do a degree every 1/10 of a second, or you can do 30 degrees every 1/10 of a second if you wanted to get real aggressive with it. And then turbo decrease rate is the same thing, but how it takes it away. And the reason that's important is if you're driving along full throttle and it's got all this turbo in the motor and you go to let off the throttle, it'll take all the timing out and it'll feel like kind of drag brake too fast. So you want to use the turbo decrease rate to kind of fine tune that feel. And generally speaking, you want to take it out pretty slow for the most part. Slower than what it applies it is usually the safe way to go. The important thing to keep in mind when you're using turbo and boost, they all add together on top of your end bell timing. So all of the timings that are available, whether it be the end bell time of the motor, which is usually maybe 15 to 30 degrees, that adds into the boost and that adds into the turbo. So they all get together. And I always like to, I'm a little wary when I say a max amount, but beyond like maybe 50, 60 degrees sometimes, that's going to be where you run into some misfiring problems. So you want to use turbo and boost pretty sparingly, especially with the faster motors, modified motors and stuff like that. A lot of guys are using like 5 degrees of boost, 10 degrees of turbo, things of that nature. So electronic timing is kind of one of those danger options where you can set the speed control to kill and run into some problems. So just, use it very carefully, sparingly, turn it down. And then if you go down here, you got these configurations. This is for the data logging and the live data logging. It doesn't affect any of the operation of the speed control, but if you want to make your data logs show you the wheel speed and all that, you can put all that in here, gear ratio, tire diameter, all that fun stuff. And then the gear ratio is your final drive. So if you have reductions or a transmission in there, it's spur gear divided by pinion gear multiplied by the transmission reduction, just so you know. And then finally, at the very, very bottom, we got our basic data logs that the speed control saves that you can take a look at a glance very easily. This is it shows you max speed control temperature, max motor temperature, minimum battery voltage, max motor RPM, and if the speed control supports current, it shows you the max current. And like I said, the X does not, the G3 does. This speed control has never been run in a vehicle, so that's why all this information is kind of junk info there. And like I said in the beginning, once you make all your changes, don't forget to hit save. Otherwise, it's all for naught. And when you exit out of here, nothing good is going to happen with your profile. So we get down to there, and then all right. Then to exit, you can either you can back out here and disconnect here, or you can do it from inside that main page as well. Disconnect, and then we are all. Well, that was not quick. That's 15 minutes of me rambling on about speed control settings, and I hope a lot of that makes sense. If it doesn't, we have a podcast where Matt and I sit down and talk about this as they apply to racers. Spencer Rivkin has done some great videos on a lot of the settings, so has Adam Drake. So by all means, get some more information on these speed controls from other sources than myself. This is a lot of it's my take on it, but again, I've been working with a lot of our team drivers and regular racers as I've been traveling these last few months, and I think we got a pretty good feel on what all these different setups do. So if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach us directly by sending us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com. I mentioned we do have a podcast. It's called RC Stuff, powered by Hobbywing. We give away free Hobbywing stuff each and every episode. All you have to do to find out how to enter to win is listen to an episode. Just look up RC Stuff, powered by Hobbywing on your favorite podcast service. And as always, folks, thanks for watching another episode of The Charlie Show, new every Tuesday right here on the Hobbywing official YouTube channel. We will see y'all next time.